Hello students, today we're going to be focusing on inequalities. Specifically, we're going to look at graphing and solving one-step inequalities. Please don't forget to take notes as you go, and at the end of the video, go to the website and complete the check. So we're first going to start off with graphing inequalities, and we need to know what inequalities are. We have ourselves two types. The first type are symbols that mean greater. So we have ourselves the greater than, which looks like this, and the greater than or equal to, which looks like this. We also have the symbols that imply or mean lesser. So we have the less than symbol, which looks like this, and the less than or equal to symbol, which looks like this. You can see the difference between top to bottom is the difference of that line underneath. That line underneath means the equal to. You can also see there's a relationship going from left to right, and that they're different from top to bottom and similar left to right even though they're facing different directions. And that is going to be the difference when we graph. We have two ways that we're going to need to graph, and you need to know when to use an open or a closed circle. Open circles are for greater than or less than, and closed circles are for greater than or equal to or less than or equal to. The difference between open and closed is if we're going to be including that number or not. Before we start graphing though, I do want to share with you a very important information about it. Do not always go off of the direction of the arrow in the inequality to determine which way to shade. Meaning this less than sign right here, just because the arrow is pointing to the left, does not mean we shade to the left. So let me show you an example of that. So here's our first one. It says x is greater than 5. This means that we are talking about all the numbers bigger than 5, which is why we use a number line. So here's our number line. We're going to locate the number 5, and since it doesn't include the number 5, that's why we're doing an open circle. Now it's all the numbers bigger than 5, which are to the right on the number line, so we're going to draw a line with an arrow at the end to show that we're going to keep going. Now let's take a look at another one. We have 3 is greater than or equal to n. So on our number line, we're going to locate the number 3. Now this says or equal to, so we're going to now do a solid closed circle because we're now including the number 3. Now if you look at them, this here and this here, the inequality symbols are pointing in the same direction, but when I go to graph my arrow, I'm actually going to do it to the left. Because if you look at it, the symbol always opens to the bigger number, so that means that the n is actually smaller than the number 3, so it's all these numbers to the left. So as you can see, even though it looks like the arrow is pointing to the right, when we graph it, it's actually the opposite direction, which is why we don't want you to rely on the arrow to determine which way to shade. So now let's start solving inequalities. We're only going to do one step today. And I want you to compare your inequalities to your equations. When we did our equations, like the one on the left, what we did is we looked at the fact it was a negative 11, so we do the inverse operation, and we're going to add 11 to both sides, which causes that to cancel out. And we're left with v is equal to negative 16. We only have one solution. If we do the same thing with the inequalities, we're still going to draw a line down through it, and we're going to still add 11 to both sides, which will still make that cancel. But now instead of saying v is equal to negative 16, it's going to be v is less than negative 16. So since it's many numbers and not just one, we use a number line to represent our solution. So we're going to locate the number negative 16 on our graph. And since it is just less than, that means it's an open circle, and it's all the numbers that are smaller than that, which is always going to go to the left. So smaller numbers go to the left, so I'm going to draw my line with the arrow to the left. So let's take a look at another one. We have 14 is less than or equal to p plus 13. Same process as before. Since it's almost like an equation, we're going to draw that line, and now we're going to subtract 13 from both sides because it's a plus 13. Now what happens here is the 13s cancel out, and we're left with 1 is less than or equal to p. So now we're on to our number line. We're looking for the number 1, and you decide open or closed. Since we have the line underneath, it is a closed circle, and it's numbers that are bigger than 1. P has to be larger than 1. Those are all the numbers to the right. So once again, even though this is pointing to the left, our arrow is actually going to the right because p is greater than 1. Now let's talk about multiplying and dividing. So we need two cases here where we're involving multiplication by positives and by negatives. So with multiplying by a positive, let's take a look at this inequality. It says 6 is less than 8. So let's say we multiply both sides by the number 3. What my resulting answer would be is 18 is less than 24. This is a true statement. 18 is smaller than 24. Well, let's see what happens now when we multiply by a negative. So if we have 6 is less than 8, if I multiply both sides by negative 3, I get negative 18 is less than negative 24. Now be careful with negatives. Even though the 24 is bigger than 18 in the positives, it's the opposite when it comes to negatives. It's actually going to, the negative 18 is actually bigger than the negative 24. So this is actually a false statement. So in order to make up for that, what we need to do is take our inequality sign and flip it over so it goes the opposite direction. So now we have negative 18 is greater than negative 24, and that is true. So when we solve these problems, we need to make sure if we're multiplying by a negative on both sides, we're flipping our inequality. So that is our main rule. Please make sure you're writing this down. When you're multiplying or dividing on both sides by a negative number, you must flip the inequality. So your less than becomes a greater than, and vice versa. Same thing with the or equal to's. You need to make sure you're flipping it over. So let's take a look at two examples where we involve multiplying and dividing. So in this problem here, as you can see, it's negative 6 times z, so the opposite is going to be dividing. And just like before, to show division, we're going to do the fraction bar, and the negative 6's will cancel out because it becomes 1. 54 divided by negative 6 is a negative 7. And do you see how since I'm dividing both sides by that negative 6, I am flipping it from a greater than sign to a less than sign. So what that means is on my number line, I need to make sure I'm following my solution here. So it's an open circle on negative 7, and it's all the values bigger than negative 7, which goes to the right. One more problem. If we have negative 12 is less than or equal to, or h divided by 3. Since we have ourselves a division problem, we need to multiply both sides by 3, just like we did with our regular one-step equations. So what happens here, though, is we are multiplying both sides by a positive number. So even though the number on the left-hand side here is negative, that does not mean we need to flip. Because this number here and this number here, we're multiplying by a positive, we actually are not going to flip. So those 3's on the right-hand side cancel because we get 1, and we have negative 36 is less than or equal to h. So once again, we're going to have our number line. It'll be a closed circle this time, and it's all the numbers that are bigger than negative 36, which move to the right. So before we wrap this up, there are 3 things that you need to remember. First, do not rely on your arrow for the direction to tell you where to draw the line. Second, only switch the inequality if you're multiplying or dividing by a negative on both sides of the inequality. And remember the difference between when you do an open and closed circle. If you have any questions, make sure you write them down now and bring them to class tomorrow. Also, make sure you go to the website and do the video completion form. I'll see you tomorrow.